Hello, everyone, and welcome to AAPI Communities in Conversation, a series of live online conversations between writers, creators, and librarians that centers Asian American and Pacific Islander voices, books, cultures, and experiences. This monthly this monthly program is hosted by the University of South Carolina's Augusta Baker Endowed Chair, Publishers Weekly, and Penguin Random House Library Marketing. My name is Angeline Cruz. I'm a public librarian at Azusa City Library in Southern California. I'm a board member of Library Reads, and I love recommending books to readers. I'm also an advocate for reading for all ages, especially adults. I am delighted to be here with you today, and it's my pleasure to introduce our special guest authors. They are Naomi Hirohara, with an immersive World War II mystery about a Japanese-American family in crisis, Clark and Division, from Soho Crime, and Sujata Massey, with an engaging mystery about a trailblazing female lawyer in 1920s India, The Bombay Prince, also from Soho Crime. Two illuminating books by two illuminating authors. Naomi and Sujata, thank you for being here today. We are excited to hear from you. So I'd like to start off by asking you both to share a little bit of information about your novels. So let's start with you, Naomi.
Well, you did a good summary, in one sentence, but it is about, it's a story about sisters, Rose and Aki, and it's also about their family, the Ito family. So they go from this area of Los Angeles called Tropico into the detention center in Manzanar, which is in the Owens Valley. And from there, Rose, the older sister, and the one that Aki, she's the shining star in Aki's life. She leaves the detention center early to Chicago, which was the #1 destination for Japanese Americans from the 10 mass incarceration camps. And then Aki and her parents follow, only to discover something terrible has befallen Rose. So now it's up to Aki to find out the truth of what happened to her older sister, as well as negotiate her immigrant parents, through this very chaotic time in their lives and in American history as well.
Thank you. And Sujata, can you tell us about your book, The Bombay Prince?
Had to unmute. Thank you, everybody, for coming. First of all, it looks like a really nice turnout. So I had a kind of a nice challenge. I was writing the third book in a series, my Perveen Mystery series, which is about Bombay's first woman lawyer. And so I didn't have to completely come up with a concept, which is something Naomi obviously did with Clark and Division. I was familiar with these characters, and I wanted to take the readers a little bit closer into the home life of my heroine, Perveen, who is she's a 23-year-old solicitor, and as a woman who's not living with a husband, she's living with her parents because she has an estrangement, which you'll learn about in the earlier books. And so one thing that really did happen in the year 1921, that fall, was Edward, the Prince of Wales, Edward VIII, came and visited India. And it was a strategic visit that was supposed to shore up Indian support for the monarchy. And the city of Bombay, where Perveen and her family live, has a lot of business people that are really profiting from British rule, including her own family. And so she's in this uncomfortable position because she believes in the freedom movement. And when the prince comes to visit, these riots break out throughout the city, protests against him being there that are inspired by, they're being led by Mahatma Gandhi. So that, all these things are going on. And at the same time, this wonderful young student who had come to Perveen for some assistance dies right as the prince is passing her college. And it's clearly a strange death. Something's wrong with this death, whether it's a suicide or a murder or a political act. We don't know. So those are the things that are up against each other in the Bombay Prince.
Thank you. So let's talk a little bit about roots. What would you like to share about your cultural heritage? And have you visited your parents' home countries? Why or why not? If yes, how was it? Let's start with you, Sujata.
Okay. Yeah, I have a triangulated identity. My father is from India, and he was born in Jamshedpur in the in the British period. Let's say he was late in British rule. He was born, so he was a small child during World War II, and he was aware when freedom came. And my mother was on the other side of the world. She was born during the war in Germany, and they met in Britain, and I was born in Britain after my dad had gotten his PhD. And so the first two kids in the family I grew up in were born in Britain, and the last one was born in the United States, which is sort of like, I'm thinking about these Japanese families in California and how there were these people, some were here, some were there. So, we are an immigrant family. And in the early part of my childhood, I visited Germany quite a bit because it was much more accessible, especially when we lived in Britain. I didn't get to visit India until I was 9 years old, and I had my 10th birthday there. And it was a life-changing trip. I loved India from the moment I was there. I felt extremely welcomed. I was fascinated, charmed. My family was living in Minnesota, and it was snowy, and we got to go away one snowy Minnesota winter for my dad to have a sabbatical in India, and we went all these different places. So it began for me there. So I guess I would say that I have had positive experiences in both my parents' countries, and also, some negative things have happened. But it turns out that I just felt like mining deep into India. And with the writing I've done, I've learned a lot about my own family history.
Amazing. How about you, Naomi? What would you like to share about your heritage?
Yeah, I think as Sujata mentioned, there's, diaspora, that goes on with both sides. And for myself, my mother is from Hiroshima. And my dad was born here. He was born in Watsonville, California, so John Steinbeck country. And then his family, there was someone died in the family, so he and his older siblings, who were all Americans, had to go to Japan, to Hiroshima. And he was there during both my parents are atomic bomb survivors. So the interesting thing is my mother was Japanese and my father was an American citizen during that experience. And my father, because he only had sole citizenship, he was able to return back to California very early on in 1947, around there. For myself, my mother, because I was my mother's only kind of blood relative in this country. So I went to Hiroshima in Japan when I was 3 years old, like during the summers. So we would go back and forth. So I think my first language was Japanese. So after I returned to Altadena, California, which is in the Pasadena area, I'm talking to the neighbors, the blonde, blue-eyed neighbor, a boy in Japanese. And of course, because you're kids, he totally understood everything I was saying. Because I think there's something that transcends language when you're at that age. But so I feel very at home, specifically in Hiroshima. I mean, we view it in this country as a place of trauma, and certainly that was there. But since I experienced it in the 60s and 70s, and I studied in Japan as well, I've seen it more as its new incarnation. And I think so that's probably something that's always stayed with me, that no matter what kind of hardship that a country or whatever, a family is going through, there is this element of hope. So I think that's kind of a theme of myself as a person and maybe my writing as well. And my dad, I've been to Watsonville. It's great. I love their strawberries.
So let's stay with you, Naomi. What did you like about your previous work as a newspaper editor at the Raffle Shimpo? And how did your work in journalism help you become a fiction writer?
It was my work at this Japanese American newspaper. It's the largest. It's called Raffle Shimpo, and it still exists. It started in 1903. And can you believe it? Other larger mainstream papers have gone away, but this little one keeps going on. And I think because there's a certain community that really appreciates what it covers, that what it covers is not in other sources. So I think for me, it just because I'm Japanese American doesn't mean I know, my community's history, even regionally. So I think Rafu is the old Japanese name for Los Angeles. And I think it was taken from Cantonese. So it forced me to get to know Los Angeles in a broader way, and to understand the long history that Japanese Americans have been in this city as well as in the whole state. So so I think it's definitely enabled me to tackle like a historical mystery like Clark and Division, because I've been interviewing these people who are born in the 1920s, and earlier, since I was in my 20s. So I think all of those layers of experiences and stories have kind of soaked through. And now I think through fiction, it could, emerge pretty organically.
Thank you. Sujata, you were a feature writer at a newspaper as well. How did that work to help you become, to create fiction work?
Well, it's funny because it was a daily newspaper in the city of Baltimore, Baltimore Evening Sun. And it was sort of the lesser cousin to the Baltimore Sun. They were owned by the same company, but our circulation was a little bit smaller. But what was really special about it was, for me, was the drama and the excitement of the newsroom. And at that time, this is the late 1980s, there was a steady stream of young reporters of color starting work at that paper, because there was a program with the University of Maryland where kids got scholarships there, promising students of color. They worked on the student paper, they were journalism students, and then they got this automatic first job. Now, I wasn't part of that program, but I want to say how much I benefited from that program. And just that experience that all of a sudden I was learning about different experiences, different neighborhoods, going to different kinds of parties, socializing, doing my writing, but it was a really creative and worldly experience for somebody that's at not a very significant, city newspaper. And I wrote feature stories. So I covered a whole lot of different things. Like I interviewed interesting people in the community, people that maybe they did something with education or the arts or food or fashion. So I got my just got my feet wet learning how to describe a lot of different things that I was seeing and hearing. And I had to make those decisions when I was writing an article. What am I going to take from that time to present a picture of that person or what's going on in that school or in that neighborhood? So I was learning those kinds of detail drops that I would do later on as a novelist.
It's amazing. But did you think about an alternate path? So for example, what other professions were you thinking if like writing didn't, work out? What could you be doing right now? Would you still be at the paper? What do you think?
Well, I think I would have still be at the paper if it hadn't been the strange thing that my husband I got married to somebody who had a Navy commitment. So we went to Japan. I had to leave the job So I had to find some way to keep writing. And it was either going to be being a freelance reporter or trying to write a novel and just see what happened with it. I didn't expect much. So I really thought that my career was going to be as a journalist, even though I loved reading fiction. I'd always been writing stories. I just didn't really think that I had it in me to be a novelist. So it was all just because I had to lose my job that I this wonderful second career opened to me.
Great. How about you, Naomi? Same question. Like, what would have happened if you, didn't become a writer, like a fiction writer? What would you be doing right now?
Well, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a librarian, but I'm very disorganized. So, in terms of being the very traditional, like things would be misshelved, I'm sure, if I was ever in charge of a little library. But I think the research part, I mean, there is a side of me that loves doing research. So I could probably, dig being a reference librarian and kind of helping to direct other people to sources. Yeah, either that. And then I contemplated being a lawyer, but I don't like conflict. So that's a big problem, I think.
So I want to point out, if I could just interject, there's a library in Naomi's wonderful novel, Clark and Division. There's a whole lot of action at the library. So if anybody ever wants to, I mean, I just thought it was, the library is like a character in the book. It's just, it's such an important place and so many people go through it.
Amazing. So Sujata, let's go back to you. So you did mention, it was interesting, you wrote a mystery series called The Rei Shimura in Japan. So how did that come about? I think you already sort of touched up on it.
Yeah, I gave
because of you gave me a hint. Could you tell us more about that?
I was forced to move to Japan as a Navy bride, and I found myself living in a town called Hayama, beautiful beachside town about an hour south of Tokyo, and it's close to Yokosuka, which is where there is a Navy base, and there was, that's where my husband would go, and he'd get on a ship and he'd go out, and I had all this time to myself, and I wanted to write something, and I love to read mysteries, so it was really just kind of putting those two things together, but I didn't want to write a memoir. So I did not make the character an Indo-German lady, young woman. But I did put her at my age, which at the time was a young 27, though I felt so mature. And and so Rei Shimura is the things that we had in common were she was an English teacher in Japan, and while she did her English teaching, she solved, sort of bad things happened and she got embroiled in them and solved the mysteries. And I also did teach English. And so those novels are a lot about the kind of like the different groups of people that are living in Japan together. And so I talk about the impact of the military on the Japanese community, especially the women and children that were left behind after the occupation.
Right.
And I talk about what happened with the Koreans who were kidnapped to Japan and forced to become potters, and then they were left afterwards, and that they didn't quite have the full rights as anybody else. And so I talk about Japan, but I talk about a lot of other people, because let's face it, I'm not, a Nihonjin. I'm not, a Nisei or a Sansei, so I don't have that. But I have that interest in looking at a country and loving the place it is, but also reflecting on what it is to be an outsider in that place.
Yeah, I think they're just brilliant. And I was lucky enough to blurb your Tohoku, the Kizuna Coast, which was the one that looked at the Tohoku, the aftermath of the Tohoku earthquake and tsunami. And I was going, Sujata, how could you? Because I actually gone there a year afterwards, and you just captured it so beautifully and accurately. And I was, that's your magical power, I think, Sujata, for sure.
Thank you, Naomi.
So Naomi, you actually have a Japanese American gardener main character with your Masa Rai series. Tell us how that particular character came about.
Well, that was very much inspired by my father. And I think what I like to cover, feature, are kind of invisible people or underestimated people. And since we're on Zoom, you can't see me, but I played basketball in high school, but I'm less than 5 feet tall. So I think there's something inside of me like, I'll show them. And so Moss, it is he's a atomic bomb survivor like my father, but a gardener, a blue collar worker. So he's very much ignored, but that turns out to be his superpower because he is underestimated, that he could like go into, freely go into places and, no one will pay attention to him, but he is a lot smarter. He's very bright and smart in spite of his inability to speak either Japanese or English that well. And so that's kind of my father in a nutshell. And he finally read a couple of my books that were translated in Japanese, and he read them. He goes, "Hey, this is me," But I told he was helping me this whole time. I go, "Dad, my first book took 15 years." I go, "Dad, you knew I was writing about a character like you." And I was thinking to myself, but he's no detective. But he kind of followed me, out on the porch when I was leaving. And he was saying, "Hey, my friends want to know when the next book is coming out." So I knew that was his way as a compliment. He couldn't say, "Oh, I really liked it." But he's, just the fact that he mentioned his friends like it. So I knew, I had done okay.
So Clark and Division is actually a standalone historical, mystery. What inspired you to pursue this? So it was like a break from your mystery series. And what was it like to research this setting?
I had done so much work over the years, and then I had done a book for Heyday Books called with a friend called Life After Manzanar. So that's when I knew from the people I interviewed at the paper that so many people had ties to Chicago, but I never had these things together. But before World War II, there were 400 Japanese Americans. By the mid 40s, there were 20,000. So that kind of shows you how many people the government were encouraging. The Quakers who were helping Japanese Americans were encouraging them to go to this city because it was at the time, it was the number 2 city. It was located in the middle of the United States. There was like defense factories and other, manufacturing that needed people, which is so ironic. The government locked up these 120,000 people saying they were they might be capable of sedition, but then you're sending them to work in a defense factory. Something doesn't quite track there, So I just found it really fascinating. And then there was a community report, a resettlement report that explained that there was a lot of juvenile delinquency among Japanese Americans. And it was first the young people, the 20-year-olds who were sent to Chicago first. And there was reports of children being born out of wedlock. There was abortions, which were illegal at the time. Stick up, man. There's a lot of things that actually are in the book that's based on incidents. And I just thought that was fascinating. And it kind of goes against the whole, like when we talk about Asian Americans, there's kind of like this model minority myth, like, oh, look at why can't other people of color be like, Asians, or look at the Japanese Americans. They kind of weathered this terrible incident and now they're the, stellar people. But I think if you dig deeper, you see that people were, acting out, and there's a fracturing within the family that maybe not public, but I wanted to show that, hey, we're humans, and we shouldn't be used as like the model minority. We had, we've had to, there's been a brokenness, that has happened because of these things. And I think younger people kind of sense that, and they want to, they're in need of kind of seeing what truly happened. And that's what I'm trying to provide actually through fiction, because sometimes nonfiction doesn't have those answers.
Thank you. So Sujata, who was your inspiration for Perveen mystery? When I was reading the Bombay Prince, I felt like I wasn't just reading a mystery, I was learning a lot about the Parsi community. So how was that process like? So there are two questions. So who was your inspiration? And then what was it like incorporating the cultural background of the characters as you let the mystery unfold?
Yeah, so I made my character a lawyer because I had learned that there were some early women lawyers in India during the 1920s and even before. And the first lawyer that we know about is a solicitor called Cornelia Sarabji. And then the second one is a barrister called Mithan Tata Lam. And they both came out of this Parsi background. And that was significant because it's a really small minority religious group within India. And outside of India, they're known as the Zoroastrians. And the origins of the religion are in Iran or Persia, and it predated Christianity and Judaism. And so when Islam came to Persia, it was a start of a migration of these Zoroastrians to India, where they became called Parsis, a reference to Persia. So I felt that because those early women lawyers were Parsi, I was going to honor that community by having Perveen be a Parsi. And also, I think it's significant, I've been thinking about this recently. Why are there so many Parsis that were in education and in medicine and in law? Even though they made up 6% of Bombay's population, just 6%. They were a third of the lawyers, a third to one half. I've seen even that estimate, like a crazy amount. And the thing is, when you're small, you've got to have a big voice in order to be seen and to be safe in society, I think.
Wow.
Maybe that's why Naomi went out for basketball. So it's like there's a whole lot operating with the success of the Parsi people, but it's continuing, like that there are a lot of wonderful writers who are Parsi, people in film. And I in order to write about this community, because my own Indian side is a Hindu side, that's the majority religion. I started to make friends in the community and find people that were involved. For example, in journalism, there's a really wonderful magazine in India called Parsiana that comes out every 2 weeks, which is the magazine for the Parsi community in India. And so, I know the editor, I know the editor's daughter. I'm always, I will go there and ask questions. So, that's how I sort of got into that world.
Amazing. Naomi, did you have an inspiration for Aki? And what drives her character? She kind of like you.
Well, it's funny. People say, "Oh, I really see you in Aki," but it was actually harder for me to develop Aki than Moss, which would seem strange because and I'm a woman. Right. I think the thing that we shared the most is being second generation or having an immigrant parent. And I think that may be different about Clark in Division 2, because there's many books in which the character is an immigrant, but in this case, or from another country. But in this case, Aki's like 100% American, she herself, she wasn't like me. She's never been to Japan, before, which makes her situation all the more unbelievable that she and families and people like her would be, seen as dangerous and, be sent to go into these camps. I think it was hard too, because I'm an older sister. Very much a younger sister's perspective. So I had to actually interview my friends who are the younger sisters and kind of say, well, give me some of your stories. Like, how do and everyone's story is a little bit different, but they were very, but I did take, like, one of my girlfriends said, oh, she tried on, her older sister was the shining star. So when her sister wasn't around, she would try on her clothes. Kind of built that into the book. But when you're doing a historical, it can't only be the outside external events that propel the book. It has to be something that's related specifically to the characters, and just the fact that she is the younger sister, and without that older sister in her life, is going to have to internally find the strength to step out, which is really her calling, because in the first scene, she's born, her sister takes up the stage of the birth. We even know Aki's name in the beginning, but it's a breech birth. So that's kind of a sign. Aki is very different, and she herself through this book will discover how different she is.
So I'm curious, if the settings were switched to the present, and let's say it's pre-COVID, would your characters have an easier time or harder time to do what they were doing? Naomi, let's start with you again.
That's such a, I think that it would be, there would be more, there's some microaggressions that Aki has to deal with. And I think those microaggressions are very prevalent, so
Yes.
it would take, and it really depends to, like, the geography of where they live, and each community kind of deals with these issues of race and identity a little bit differently. So I think it could be written, but I do think part of what I'm trying to do is unearth, like, real things that happened in the past. And I think once we see them and they're more tangible, we kind of start to understand the present. So I think that's more the connection, because
that's important. Yeah.
Because I think some young people go, why are my parents like this? Why is our family like this? Why are we fractured? Why is this happening? And then once you learn truths, like your elders had gone through, it's like a light bulb moment. Like, okay, now I understand why I'm the way I am, because of what these ancestors had gone through.
Thank you. Sujata, I'm also curious, how would your character be like in a modern setting? Would they have an easier or harder time doing what they're doing?
Well, the big thing that would be changed is there wouldn't be the British colonialism.
Well, yes.
To be free. And so Perveen sees that shining star of everything's going to be fine and fair if we can just have control over our country. And of course, it's never as simple as that. There's still crime. There's still people that are able to manipulate power for corporate interests. There are governments that are out of touch with minority groups, all that's going on. So I think there'd still be a lot to dig into, and it would be pretty dangerous, actually. It's dangerous to speak your mind often right now, especially if you're a journalist. Now, the situation on one of the positive things that I would say now is that there are lots and lots of women lawyers in India, and that the working conditions for women are among probably the fairest or the most advanced in areas like law, as opposed to other places. So I think that she would be she would be enjoying that. And then, of course, there's still the family dynamic, because people are still trying to figure out, does it make sense for our children to live at home with us until they're married? Or does it make sense to still have a big house where once my child is married, they'll bring their spouse and they'll have children there? Like, there are people in my extended family that live that way. So there's just a whole lot of a mishmash. I think that you could do a series about somebody today, solving crimes and trying to practice law and have justice for all.
So, okay, I think we have a few more minutes for questions. Do you feel that your characters were supported in their pursuit of justice? And which supporting character was your favorite? Sujata.
Oh, are they supported? Well, the thing about that is Perveen has a very complicated relationship with her father, Jamshedji,
Yes.
who is the big shot lawyer, and she works at his firm on his pleasure because there's no other place that would hire a woman lawyer. And so he does believe a lot of the same things as her, but he's also very pragmatic. Like, how will I survive in society if I go out on a limb on this? Like, I've got to get along with the police. You've got to get along. We've got to show them that we're a regular law firm and we're not aspiring to be terrorists. So I think that I write about him a lot. So I think that he is probably the most important supporting character for Perveen.
Right, I agree. How about you, Naomi? Do you feel your main character, Aki, was supported in her pursuit? And who was your favorite supporting character?
No, I mean, I think that's part of her journey. And she's getting pressure like from her family, to keep silent because like shame, like the things that happened to her sister could be interpreted as shame, and they don't want, this is a time of history where these families and people are trying to look forward and have a better future. And so they don't want to look back or, be transparent about the damage that has happened to them. So I think, and then of course with the Chicago police, and they had a very notorious, I mean, this is fact, a very notorious reputation, and they would kind of take advantage of people who are in vulnerable situations. So she really, that's what makes Aki different, because she wants, no matter what, because of a love for her sister, she wants to go forward. One of my favorite, and I guess two people that do help her, a couple of people worked in the librarian, an African American, Phyllis and Nancy, a Polish.
Yes, Phyllis.
Nancy especially tries to help her at the end. But my favorite is a Nisei boy, young man named Hammer. He wears a zoot. He's from East LA, Boyle Heights, and he wears that kind of zoot suit over in Chicago. And but he's actually much more complicated and interesting, as the story goes along. So I like Hammer a lot.
Great. So Naomi, do you feel you're supported in your writing profession, and how is it important? How important is it to be part of a community? Do you feel supported?
Wow, you're really going deep here. I think it's kind of sad. I think for so long I haven't felt supported, and I just had to. And I think in the end, we as writers have to believe in our work. Yes. I think so many people are looking for that one teacher, that one agent, that one publishing house that affirms you are good and worthy. And it really, you when it comes down to it, you are the singular person that has to believe that. And I've just been because there's no writers in my family. My dad was supportive. He didn't know what I was doing. My mother she is supportive. Like when we have events, she will make like the best food, but she has not admitted that she's read any of my books. to say. And I've written a lot of books. And I think it's more fear because like you look at it like, oh, is this what my daughter's thinking about me? Even though it's fiction. So I think I do feel supported by my ethnic community and from my mystery writers. And we have crime writers of color, and we feel, we really are trying to prop each other up because, it's a tough business.
Sujata, do you feel supported in your writing profession?
Well, yes, I do. And I think that one of the things that has been helpful for me is when I started about 1 million years ago, when my first book sold, it was 1996 and it came out in 97. I became involved with an online community of mystery readers. And this particular group is called Dorothy L. And it was like a listserv, and I'm not involved anymore, but I believe there actually are people in the Zoom room that are from that Dorothy L. So think about that. That's over 20 years. It's still going. And, from there, I was in this group, Sisters in Crime. Like before I was published and I was struggling to write, I took some night school writing classes. And one of them was taught by a writer, Louise Titchener, in Maryland. And she was a member of Sisters in Crime. And she said, well, has anybody heard of Malice Domestic? And that's this very warm convention of mystery writers and readers and, just all kinds of people with panels where writers talk about the things that they're writing and the issues that come up. And so I went and I did that. And I felt like I was maybe the second youngest person there. I know my friend Sue Trowbridge is on the Zoom, and she was always the youngest person there. But to be in your 20s and one of those things. So that was helpful for me too. So I would say that I get my community support in places like that. And it's wonderful also to have publishers that are saying like, oh yeah, I guess we would like to publish a story about a person of color. And we think that there might be more than just people of color who would want to read the story. Like that was the whole thing in the past, that they would think that your book would be in a certain section and that only that market would be interested in your book. But I think that we're learning now that people are they're interested in stories about real characters. And if it's a place they haven't been before, that's all the more interesting.
All right. Now we would like to invite some questions from the audience. So here's one. Do you have any advice for members of the AAPI community that are interested in writing?
I could
go, Sujata, let's go.
I'll start with that. Okay. So, well, my first advice, which is for a lot of people, would be if you can take a night school course or get in a writing group. And because I feel like when you start to become accountable to people for your work, like that you actually have to turn things in, you're going to get a move on. And then start entering contests. Enter contests like the Eleanor Taylor Bland contest, which is specifically for writers of color. Enter the Malice Domestic Unpublished Writers Grant. Enter the St. Martin's and Malice one. There's just a whole range. And if you belong to a group, like if you say you can join Crime Writers of Color without having published a novel, which is different from Mystery Writers of America. You have to have published with a certain type of publisher to get into the group. But this group is not like that. So, that's my bit of advice. Naomi, do you have something to add to that?
I was just listening to the person who wrote Atomic Habits, which is like a really popular book right now.
Yes, Atomic Habits.
Yeah, and I do think there is just something to be said about doing something regularly, and it could be a short, just write for 15 minutes a day or, maybe 5 days a week, and just get into the groove. I think sometimes young writers could get ahead of themselves and they're just thinking, I got to write this kind of novel and it has to have this kind of, reception. But, I think I was just thinking back to myself and just all those times where, it's a part of like extension writing groups and things. But I think the regularity of just keep believing in yourself. Sometimes you're going to be going in the wrong direction and you got to pull back and go into another, but just keep it steady, and keep doing it. And then, I think if you just do like 500 words per day that are good, then after a year, you're going to have like a manuscript, so don't get too ahead of yourself and think, oh, I have to write, these 300 pages right now. Just do a little of a day, and just also be thinking, because writing is more than just typing on your computer. It's like when you wake up or go to bed, just like think about the characters and what you're trying to say, because that's a very important part of the writing process as well.
Thank you. Here's a question from audience member Miriam Khan. What was it like to have your work recorded for audiobooks? Have you listened to the performances? Let's go with Naomi.
It's actually audiobook companies are pretty, open to hearing your suggestions. So I'm so happy with both the reader of Massey books as well as the reader for Clark and Division. And I listened to some audiobook readers, and the woman who Alison Hirahara, who reads Aki's voice, I just felt like there was some warmth in her voice. She also has read for Pachinko and one of Haruki Murakami's books. And so I'm really happy. But to tell you the truth, I haven't been able to listen to the whole thing. I did listen. Oh, yeah. Also, I have a Hawaii series. And I recommended this young woman who's actually Filipino, white, Japanese, just like my character. And I love the way she handles the pigeon a lot better than I could. So,
oh, nice.
Yeah.
How about you, Sujata?
I've had a number of readers, and they all have things that are special about what they do. And the Praveen Mystery Series is currently, the last two books have been narrated by a woman called Sneha Mathan. And what's very special about her, besides her ability to do a lot of different voices, is she speaks with a slightly British intonation as a South Asian person. And because this is that colonial period, that ability to have that, and that's, sometimes people call it a convent school accent, this mix of British and Indian, it's really, really special. And nobody would know about it unless they came from it. So it's really a delight to listen to her read. And I think that people who enjoy audiobooks with a British narration will enjoy, they'll be surprised at this really special voice.
All right, here's another question from Judy. Which character did you most closely identify with? Was it ever difficult to remove yourself from the actual writing and development of your story? Let's go with you, Sujata.
No, it was, I always felt like that the women I wrote about were braver and smarter and more in action than me. I'm more of that person that's sort of sitting there thinking, oh, I wish I would have said that. Oh, my heroines do that. So I'm grateful to be able to write people like that. No confusion at all.
How about you, Naomi?
I strangely identify the most with Masarai, my old man gardener, and I think it's because my alter ego is a cranky old man. It's my truth.
Let's see. There's one more here. If there's one thing, so this is from Shika. If there's one thing you both could do differently in your career, what would it be? So one thing you could both do differently in your career. So let's go with you, Naomi.
That's a really hard question to answer, because I do tend to always go, what's the silver lining to this terrible thing that's happened? So I do feel like the setbacks that I've had in my career have helped me get to this place. So I think that one thing I would say is just don't think, because I've had situations, I've had multiple editors, and, there's a lot of turmoil in this business, but I think I would say I would not let the turmoil get to me, in terms of my writing, because I think sometimes I did have a crisis of confidence at times, and I would tell that person, just chin up and keep going. It's not you, just keep going.
How about you, Sujata?
Well, I had the way my career began is I was a young childless newlywed, and so moving around to do research on the books was really easy. Then I became a parent, and for so many years I've thought, oh, it would be just so wonderful if I could spend half my year in India and just be there and just be soaking things up and doing my writing there. What would that be like? And I realize now, that my son is in college, I actually could do that, though there was a pandemic on. And so it's weird. It's the things you think you want to do, and that they might open ideas and open ease, and but do you really want to do them? Is one really brave enough to do those things?
Nice. I have a question myself. If you were challenged to add another genre, like to the mystery book, so like if you had to mesh it with another genre, which genre would you be interested in pursuing, Sujata? So mystery, and what other
history? So that feels really important to me. But I guess the way I would answer that question is, I'm interested in storytelling through film and series, like TV series. So I would look at it that way. I would think about, could I write a series that comes out of something that I've written, or write something new, but write it for the visual.
Yes.
That's the kind of thing that I think about.
Nice. How about you, Naomi? I think I asked you this question.
You asked me this question before, and I think
I know, and I know your answer, but I'll let you say it again.
I think it was romance. I mean, there is a side of me. I'm not romantic, but I like reading about romance, if that makes any sense. I don't like romance in the traditional way, but I do.
Yes.
There is something captivating about how people are drawn to each other, and some of that I've tried to incorporate, in Aki's life. Even Moss, there's a bit of romance there too.
Right. So I think that's it. So I just want to say thank you to Naomi and Sujata. We really appreciate you spending this time with us. Thank you to our hosts, Dr. Nicole Cook, the University of South Carolina's Augusta Baker Endowed Chair, Publishers Weekly, and Penguin Random House Library Marketing. And a very special thank you to our audience, friends, library, and publishing colleagues for joining us today. The recording will be shared with all the registrants, and we hope that you'll join the next AAPI Communities in Conversation on February 1st with guest author Gina Apostol and Jana Ray Cabrera of San Francisco Public Library. Have a wonderful day, guys. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us. And thanks everybody for spending your lunch hour or your morning coffee hour.
Yeah. And our 2022, this might be your first book virtual event. It has been for me.
Oh yeah. What a kickoff. And to be all over YouTube with these platforms is great.
Bye, Edlin.
I see lots of people in there that I know. I see Sonia Kamal, a wonderful writer is in the room. I
And-
see our publisher, Bronwyn Hruska's there.
Yeah.
Sherry Harris, president of Sisters, or former president of Sisters in Crime.
That must be Sue. Is Kristen Trowbridge Sue? I don't know.
That's her mom, but I think I
Okay.
there too. So
Okay.
yeah. See Kath Hoffner, Farida, who's come so often. Lots of people we know and people we don't know, the great librarians who are sharing our work. I really appreciate it.
For sure.
Well, shall we say goodbye?
Yeah, let's say goodbye. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you for being here.
Hope to see you in person soon, Sujata. Bye.
Okay.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
Naomi. Bye,
Thank
Sujata.
you.
I
Bye.
could drive over to Azusa. Bye.
Bye.